It's a 10:30. I'm based in Tokyo, so it's not bad at all, right?
He sits in our meetings up till midnight in Japan, so it's a tough one for him.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether I can manage 4 hours uninterrupted tonight.
No, Mr. Lux has made it clear. He's made it clear that I don't have that much time. I would have, but Mr. Lux, we have to look. We have to go through your life. So it is going to happen in 2 episodes, 3 episodes. I don't mind, but we have to take you right through from your childhood onwards.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The whole idea is for people to understand that mediators are mediators because of everything that's happened to them through life. It's not that one day some 1 to 40 hour training happened and tuck mediator made. It won't happen that way. So where do you want to start? I mean, we have to start. I tell you where we started earlier is that the circumstances in the country, in the city, in the world at the time you were born will have some impact on your growing up, the influences. So maybe we can start at that time. But this was your late 40s?
Late 40s. Sorry, what's the question?
When were you born? I mean, this was in the late 40s?
Oh, no, I was born early 50s. So obviously life has been tougher on me than if I look that old.
No. It was just, no, I had to guess from your profile on LinkedIn. I had to see from there. When you finished your law, I was taking it from there.
Early 1951.
Okay. So what was it like at that period of history? What was it like in the UK? Were you born, where were you born in the UK?
In London. Yeah. And I can't pretend that in my early years, mediation was anywhere close to what preoccupied me.
No, but generally, the London in the 1950s, what do you remember of it? What was it like?
Well, of course, it was still the after-war years. There was, compared with today, a sort of neighborliness, good neighborliness, that people behaved kindly to each other. And even in London, it was quite common to leave your door unlocked. Crime was low, and that, of course, was very refreshing. Kids could wander around without the fear that they'd be molested by predators, etc.
Yep.
And refreshingly, there were hardly any health and safety regulations. People did as they felt like.
But which part of London were you brought up?
In North London, yeah.
Okay.
But I went at quite an early age to boarding schools, so at age 7. Not so unusual in England as perhaps in other countries. But yeah, that was, it was a lovely place in the middle of, well, the first boarding school, not so nice. That was in Sussex. But then at age 11 on to another place in the middle of Derbyshire, which is a very beautiful county.
But we'll have to get you back. We're not going to go to 11 so fast. In the time that you have told me, I think we will just be out of the cradle. The kind of we look, because we have to go into the circumstances within the family that you were brought up in. What was the circumstances in that? So you can tell us a little bit about that in terms of the social structure, the family structure. A little bit about that.
Okay, I mean, my father was a refugee from Germany in the early 1930s. In fact, Mr. Hitler interrupted his law studies at Berlin University. And so, yes, then for him it was, it was pretty tough, of course, to move from, and that in those days, the 1930s, travel was not so common, and to have to uproot, leave everything and move to a new country, in your early 20s was unusual to say the least. Plus, of course, that time coincided with there was a huge recession in Germany, and there was also a big recession in the UK. So the economies of the Western world were pretty down on their heels, and it was tough finding work. But my father came with nothing, so had to stand on his own 2 feet. And to cut a long story short, ended up in East Africa, in what was then called Tanganyika.
Okay. But only thing, Mr. Lux, the point is we don't cut any story short here. We have to go through as much.
Dear, okay.
The whole idea is that no story is going to be cut short. So, because look, I'm telling you, this is not just one episode. We can go on and we can do it another time. We can continue
I'm
it.
sure for your readers, for your viewers, one episode will be great.
No chance.
They will appreciate. I'm sure, Vikram, they will appreciate that. It reminds me of Mr. Churchill, who wrote a letter to a friend. He wrote a 9-page letter to a friend and added a PS. Sorry, I didn't have time to write you a shorter letter. So I'm sure also here that if I can compress rather than go on in endless detail, I'm sure the viewers would appreciate that.
Everything is in the details. Everything is there. The point is that as we discuss it, things will come out, which you also maybe look over the years, you don't concentrate on those things of life because you take it for granted. But each of those things are important. Just the fact that he moved from Germany and he got out. Of course, now we'll get to the Africa part, but how many people moved with him? Who all moved with him? He was alone when
Yeah,
he moved?
he was alone at that time. He had a brother who was already 11 years older and married and in practice as a doctor in Berlin, and a mother who was staying with the brother in Berlin. So he came across alone in 1933.
I mean, that must have been really tough for him. I mean, all alone, suddenly you into Africa. I mean, but what, I mean, did he speak to you about it? What was it like?
Yes, I mean, there are all sorts of stories about the period there, which at one point he was working on a strawberry farm for a crazy farmer. One other refugee from Germany working on the same strawberry farm. And the farmer was completely crazy. One day all the strawberries are supposed to be down by the river. The next day they're supposed to be moved up behind the house or whatever. And the other refugee got so paranoid about all this that he actually committed suicide. At which time my father thought, it's time to move on. So that's what he did.
But which part of Africa is this?
Tanganyika, so it's East Africa. It's today called Tanzania.
Tanzania, okay.
Yeah. So Dar es Salaam, the capital, and yeah.
But if you, I mean, when he was talking to you about his experiences before he got out of Germany, did he talk about that? What was it like in Germany before he moved out?
Oh, of course. It's a struggle now to distinguish between. Hello, Lisa. Nice to see you again. Yeah, of course. I mean, it's a struggle now to distinguish though between, everything one's read about pre-Second World War Germany and stories I was told. But yes, they were already in the very late 1920s, early 30s, stormtroopers on the streets attacking those who were identifiable as Jews and Jewish property and so on. And my father, who apparently didn't look Jewish, was, not in danger from that and was shepherding and trying to protect other Jewish students who did face real dangers.
Okay, so maybe, I mean, at that age, to be looking at all that, I mean, for him to grow up very fast, I mean, he had to grow up very fast, that means.
Sure. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
then, okay, so from the strawberry farms, then where does he move from there?
Well, you said he had to grow up fast. Yeah. I mean, I guess also on the, if you like, intellectual plane, to move from being a student in your final year, and in Germany, I don't know whether it's the same today, but the very top students were able to supplement their income by agreeing to teach or tutor less able students. So my father, he didn't tell me this. I learned this later by inspecting the archives at the Humboldt University in Berlin. But he was one of the few who'd been who'd been asked to teach less able students. So to go from that, from sort of fairly menial work, first in London, then in East Africa, I imagine that in itself was quite tough.
Yeah, I'm sure. But the only thing is that the fact that those experiences would have definitely, I don't know, I'm not saying that it's good for you, but it does change your life. I mean, those are you can take, they can take you anywhere. They can take you anywhere. But
That's right. It's life-forming
yeah,
experiences. Yeah.
yeah. But then now he's got out of that strawberry farm and he's now he stays in Tanzania, is it?
Yes. Well, it's approaching. The war is fast approaching, um, and yes, I think he saw an advertisement. A major African company that was looking for a bookkeeper. Now, he actually knew nothing whatever about bookkeeping, but he got hold of all the books he could find on bookkeeping, taught it to himself, applied for the job, and got the job. Um, stayed there for a while. And again, I know you don't like cutting long stories short, but
Yes, not
again,
at all. Not at all.
after a while in that position, he ended up with the British Civil Service in East Africa.
Wow, that's from where to where? Okay, so that was not okay. So he's now in the civil services and he's doing well for himself, coming out from a strawberry farm. I think that must have been, I think, good for him that way. Really good for him.
Yeah. Yes, apparently, as civil servant, one of the more amusing, or perhaps less amusing, depending on how you view it, incidents. He was supposed to be inspecting import cargoes, and one was a major import of condoms. And on inspection, these all had holes in, so were unlikely to be fit for purpose. But that's one of his tasks as a government inspector that I recall him mentioning.
Okay, so then he stays there and now he gets married there. What happens then?
Yes, he met my mother in England. She's of English stock. She was nearly 10 years younger than him, so really quite young when and very brave, because she flew out to East Africa at the beginning of the war. And, at the time, there were no long haul jets. There were flying boats, extraordinary things that, would take off in the morning, fly for a couple of hours, land somewhere nice for lunch, bit of a break, fly for a few hours in the afternoon, land somewhere nice for overnight. And the same, I think it took altogether 10 or more days to
Wow.
get from London out to East Africa.
So at least you understood that you were taking a long journey. It wasn't like you get onto a aircraft and you land there in 3 hours. You do okay.
Exactly.
So you really. But there, how many people could sit in that aircraft?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, clearly they're a lot smaller than a jumbo jet, but whether it was, 50, 100, I'm not sure.
But he would not have.
I doubt whether it was that big a payload because, engine capacity and so on. Yeah.
I think you should revive that. It should be interesting to do that journey.
Of course. Yeah.
But did he ever tell you how much it cost?
No.
Okay. So, I mean, in terms of value of money today, from there, were we as expensive or more expensive? What was it like? We would not know.
I have no idea on cost, but, travel was quite rare. So, to fly from London to East Africa, there would not have been many people doing it.
Yeah. But what about ships? I mean, ships was not an option that time. It was too long.
Well, if it took 10 days by plane, then it would have taken, 3 times that by
At least.
ship? Yeah.
And you obviously could not go. You would have had to go all the way down to Cape Horn and then come from there. It would have been a very long journey.
Yes. Well, love has a certain impatience to it, doesn't it, as well?
But it would have been really nice if you were taken out some pictures. That would have really helped.
Well, I gave you a few, but you would say that they're not of this episode.
Yeah, we'll come to this maybe afterward. I don't know how many episodes. This is going to take a long time to get there. I don't know. Let's see.
Oh, no. I've negotiated 1 episode with you, Vikram.
No, it doesn't happen that way. It doesn't happen that way, Mr. Lux. No, because you said you don't have too much time today. That was the only reason I said. Otherwise, we could obviously do it. Okay, so now, I mean, have you come into the picture or not?
No. My parents decided that they didn't want, for all sorts of reasons, to have start a family in East Africa, and during the war years. So I was born after they returned to London in 1949, I think they came back. Yeah.
Okay. So you were born here. And when are the first memories of your childhood? What memories do you have?
Oof. That's a tricky one. Again, you tend to elide, stories you've heard over the years with what may be your own memory, or maybe you're simply remembering the story.
Absolutely.
But quite a normal childhood, I would think.
But anything specific which comes to your mind, which is there, which could be a story that you were told or whatever you were actually experienced it, but anything specific that comes out?
Well, no, the general theme is a son who, for various reasons, is absolutely doted on by his mother, spoilt rotten. Impossible to teach because he's insists on playing with his little toy cars, and his poor mother is unable to find ways of hiding these toy cars to prevent them being carted into school. And a Germanic father who takes a more rigid view of things, certainly, than the mother, who says this is hopeless, we've got to send him off to boarding school, which is what then happens.
Okay. No, but then in terms of, I mean, this is now we're talking about, the car fascination starts early. That starts at what age? Was it? What I really want to see is that fascination stays. Because there's one photograph which I saw of yours,
yeah,
which was something which I really thought this is a good time to see that.
Okay.
That was
no, it did start very early. I was before I could really walk properly, I think, for some reason hung up on what would they say, petrol head or.
Yes. So this is, I mean, okay, this is the other child, this is the older child.
Yeah, that's
now, if you don't give me pictures of their childhood, I have to show people these pictures.
We'll, I guess, if you want to do it chronologically, I have no idea, Vikram, you're in charge, but chronologically, it does come a little later.
No, but this is look, when you said child with a car, this is the only one that I have, so I said might as well look at that.
Absolutely.
If you don't give me ones of the childhood, then I have to go to the older child.
Yes, but if you're asking sort of earliest driving experience, I can remember as a little kid taking the car keys from my father, and it was a large vehicle, and I had to prop myself up on lots of pillows to be able to even see out. But driving this thing around a field, I can remember. And then doesn't bode well for a lawyer, does it? But I can remember sneaking a disclaimer form from the Brands Hatch motor racing circuit into a pile of papers that I knew my father was about to sign, hoping he wouldn't spot what this one was. And basically, it was a form to allow me to drive a racing car at the Brands Hatch racing circuit at age 13. So, yeah, clearly it was something for some reason, I don't know why, that was with me from quite an early age.
So which means we had a budding F1 driver. It's just that the person took a different direction in life.
Well, budding F1, then you'd have to say without the talent, because there's not only the wish, but their desire to do something. There has to be a certain level of talent, and perhaps that was missing.
Oh, I'm sure that was there. But okay, this is much later in life. So now this is the child who's doted by his mother. And what is it like? You're growing up and with this place around you. So something about this. We're trying to just imagine that period of your life. Just trying to do that. Just whatever picture you can paint for us, because we don't have any pictures. Something on the books. It's a bit of that.
So, a comfortable London home, and a mother who, as I say, for various reasons, including the fact that she lost her own brother at quite a young age, was definitely spoiling her son rotten. A father who took the strong view that wasn't the best way to bring up a kid, and who therefore insisted that off to boarding school the boy be sent. So that's how it was.
But what about the family? With your family as such, grandfather and uncles and anything like that?
Grandparents had all perished before I was born. And uncles, aunts, not a significant influence on anything really growing up. Yes, nice people, go around, spend a day with them, but not there was no extended family of the sort I know you have, for example, in India, with a wider family group living together or closely involved. It wasn't like that. It was headed towards the nuclear family, which is today the norm.
But at that time, was it the norm, or it was just your family?
Well, as I say, the grandparents were predeceased me, so were not around. My sister came on the scene. She was 3.5 years younger. So by the time I went off to boarding school at 7, she was still a very small child. Yeah, it was the four of us, and of course the wider family on occasion, and friends, but on occasions.
But who are the other people you remember? Are there neighbors or other your father's friends, your mother's friends? Do you remember any of those people?
All of them. There were, characters, of course, around, and my parents had, quite a reasonable number of friends. So there were often cocktail parties and gatherings in the house. Yeah.
But anyone you think would have an influence on you while you were growing up? Anyone specific?
No, not. Well, one guy who had, if you're drilling down for lots of detail, then one guy who certainly had an influence on the path that was taken was a gentleman called Dr. North, whose great, and maybe there's more greats that I should add, grandfather was the Lord North, who had given away, forgive me, Lisa, the colonies. So, I think he was Prime Minister, Lord North, one of the last aristocrats or titled gentlemen to be Prime Minister. You'll have noticed Boris Johnson is definitely not Lord Johnson. So Dr. North was an interesting character. He was a psychiatrist. He'd had a troubled existence himself because he was homosexual at a time when I think it was still criminal in England to be homosexual. But he, my father, as I said, come from Germany. The first boarding school I went to, the headmaster had said, oh yes, send him off to Harrow, which was one of the sort of fashionable, prestigious English boarding schools. And it was thanks to Dr. North that he said, no, such a place would be a disaster for young Jonathan because it's all, titled English gentlemen, and he would have a rough time as soon as he said that his father was a German refugee. So thank goodness that became apparent. And it was a very different school, a very outward bound school in Derbyshire that I ended up going to as second boarding school.
But what is it? I mean, what is it like, the experience of a boarding school?
The first one was pretty miserable. For example, they had corporal punishment. Also, I mean, I guess I wasn't, during the early years, having been spoilt rotten and being used to getting what I wanted when I wanted it, it was quite tough, not getting what you wanted when you wanted it. But as I say, corporal punishment. So I think the first time I got caned was when I called an English teacher a silly prostitute at age 7. Now, I, of course, didn't know what a prostitute was at age 7. I think it was simply that there'd been builders in the house in London who used colorful language, and I probably picked up that word listening to them. But anyway, that was enough to warrant my first caning. Take your trousers down and there's like a whip that's across your backside, and quite often blood would be drawn, and then it was, of course, painful to sit down for quite a while. That wasn't a unique occasion, but it was one of the occasions. The second boarding school set its face. It was a very inspirational place. And it's, by the way, it was the first independent progressive public school, which was like a rebellion against the classic English public school, where they believed in corporal punishment, heavy emphasis on classics, Latin and Greek, and so on. This independent progressive public school had a different view. They believed in lots of outward bound activities. If you broke the rules, you might be sent for a cold shower if it was minor, or to do some estate work, picking potatoes or whatever. So nothing humiliating. That's, as I saw it, the difference between the two. Corporal punishment is always humiliating and therefore, frankly, disgusting. Whereas nothing wrong at all if someone's broken the rules in saying, okay, you're going to do some estate work, some digging, heavy digging, or, pick potatoes or something of that nature. Or a long run, maybe a 10, 15-mile run, whatever.
But that but the caning is a public caning, or is it just in the office of the whatever the?
It was in the office. I don't remember ever being. I don't think it was. My memory tells me it wasn't public. It was in the headmaster's office or the office of the master who was performing the caning. Yeah.
But looking back, I mean, do you think what was the impact that would have had on you? I mean, as such,
it did not make me respect the teachers, those concerned. To the contrary, I thought a lot less of them. Whereas I never thought less of, let's say, a teacher who sent me for a long run because I'd broken some rule. Perfectly fair. You've broken the rule, a punishment that's not humiliating.
But did you speak to your mother about it, that this is what happened? I mean, did you?
No, I don't think so, because there were kids who ran away, who were distraught and miserable and ran away. But I got the clear feeling from, as I said, my father was quite Prussian in those terms. And, you stuck it out. You didn't give up. So I don't recall ever giving up and saying, I can't take this anymore.
But I'm just thinking from the perspective of a doting mother who suddenly finds out that this is what is happening with her son.
Well,
Does she
probably I didn't tell her for that reason.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Probably I didn't. And probably if I would have done, she would have insisted that her darling son be removed from that dreadful nightmare of a place. But one of my memories in that place, and if you're not a car buff, it won't mean much to you, but I can show you. Actually, I've got a little model. This is a Jaguar XK150. Okay, and one evening when it was particularly tough, my dormitory was overlooking the front of the school. So there was a long drive leading up to, and it was sort of a circle in front of the school where the car could turn round and go back down the drive. And two young ladies in this beautiful XK150 Jaguar pitched up. And for what reason, I to this day have no idea, but I was, of course, ogling from the window this wonderful car. And in fact, I think I sneaked out and inspected it more closely. And they were clearly being shown the school. I don't know why. And I was under my bedclothes covered, and one of the women pulled back the bedclothes, and both of them decided I deserved a kiss on the cheek. So that's a memory from, so many years ago. I can.
Wow. Okay. So what was the good part about it? The women or the car? What was?
I would say both. You don't have to prefer
both.
one
Both.
over
Okay. Both. Yeah.
Both, but the women, because it was. Can we use a word like shitty on this?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it was a shitty time, and they undoubtedly, their warmth and attention felt good, and the car was a most wonderful machine. And in fact, the trouble is they've gone up hugely in value. But if I win the pools, then I'll buy one of these machines. And yeah.
But did you at any point of time have a convertible later in life?
Oh yes, I've got one now.
That should be good fun. I mean, driving that around, maybe in the English countryside and everywhere, must be good thing to have, a convertible.
Oh, absolutely. And I do like driving here and there, and maybe if we can now move on into later years, I will happily tell you about my Peking to Paris classic car rally.
it won't happen so fast. I would not, because I think we would just want to hear the good parts about boarding school and how it helped you, how it changed you. I think that part of it would be interesting.
Yeah, how it helped, how it changed. I don't know. Look, independence, yes. If you have to stand on your own 2 feet. I mean, I had to decide quite early whether I'm, how you react to sort of provocation. Now, it's not uncommon in boarding schools to find there's always in most schools a school bully, or maybe more than one. And, some of the kids would come to me and, I would talk them through it. And then I do remember the school bully at one point deciding to take me on. And I had something hard near at hand. I can't remember whether it was a broom handle or what it was. But I decided instinctively, even though it might cause injury, to use this. And the chap did go into hospital, and the headmaster asked to see me. And I stood my ground and I said, in all frankness, if the same thing happened again, I would do the same thing again, because it's intolerable that this individual is getting away and no teacher's either going out of his way or her way to see it and stop it. So I said, I don't think that he's likely to be a problem again, so I don't regret for a moment what I did. But, that suggests a predisposition to violence, which isn't there. It's just a pragmatic assessment, if you like, of what's necessary for your environment to be tolerable, which it could cease to be tolerable, obviously, if you're living in a position of fear. What's going to happen next. And those things tend to get worse, rather than better if you don't deal with them.
Yeah, you're protecting yourself. I mean, that's the way you would do it. It's self-defense or whatever. But then did it change your relationship within the boarding school after that?
Yeah, lots of kids who wanted to be your buddy because you'd stood up to the bully. But whether it changed, frankly, I don't think some people maybe like to have lots of friends. I prefer to have a few good quality friends, and so didn't suffer again in that school from bullying.
But what are the other activities? I mean, living in a boarding school must be interesting. Sports and outdoor activities and all.
Lots of sports. Football, cricket, tennis, and so on. And to preempt the question, I was not a great sportsman, more into the books and the academic side rather than the sport.
So basically, you're not going to. I mean, let me ask questions. You're going to answer things before I ask them. But otherwise, what about other things? I mean, what is that area like in terms of the nature and the terrain and all, wherever that school was?
It was in Sussex, which is a very pretty part of the country, quite heavily wooded, between London and Brighton. Not my favorite part of the country. I tend to prefer the north of England, which is more stark, more open, and corresponding. And interestingly, I think the character of the English also reflects to that extent the environment. There's more sort of not deceit. Deceit is overstating it, but the southerner is more manipulative. The northerner is more plain speaking. So I have to say I tend to prefer the more plain speaking northerner. But nevertheless, it's a pretty part of the country.
Okay. But that means what were they were? But weekends were you coming back, or I mean, you were there throughout the month or whatever the months that you had to spend there. You were not
Yeah,
coming back.
I think terms tended to be, if I remember rightly, about 12 weeks, about 3 months. And you were allowed visits from, I think you were allowed home visits at that school, either, I forget, maybe once a month, so twice a term. You know, after the first month, second month, and then third month, you're already back home. So I think it was about once a month that you could, get back home and see your parents.
So what were those visits like? Yeah, but you spoiled. You must have been spoiled during that time.
Well, look, imagine boarding school food is not exciting. It's institutional food. It's quite grim. Nothing is cooked to taste good, but to tick the minimum number of boxes as to what you need to put in your body. So, of course, getting back home to well-cooked food, to a warm bedroom, to the loving care of the home environment, of course, was a dramatic change from the school.
But what about your sister now? Because she's growing up, and what is that relationship like?
Yes, I'm not sure that I was, let's say, the perfect brother. I may have twisted her ear or whatever if she got on my nerves, but I was fiercely protective of her if anyone else tried to tease her or bully her. And I know that there's more than one kid who was sent home with a bloody nose, for taking advantage of my sister. So, we it was a small family, and we got on. She's a bright, bubbly girl, and all was good.
But what's her name?
Naomi.
Okay. Okay. So that means, but in terms of that bonding, does that bonding happen? Because if you spend most of your time in school, I mean, how does that happen? I mean, is it just meeting each other when you get back, or more than that?
But holidays are not social. School holidays, I forget now the exact duration, but I suspect it was something like a month over Christmas, probably slightly shorter over Easter, and then from July, August, probably 2.5 months in the summer. So what's that? 3, 4, 3-4 months a year you're back home.
Oh, that's not bad. That's bad.
Yeah.
But what about academics? I mean, were you good at your studies?
Yeah, pretty good. Yes, it came as a surprise to me because, as I say, as a younger kid, I didn't really do any work. And I can't say I was an all-rounder, so I don't think I was very good at sciences. Some of them I later found, courtesy of particular teachers, interesting, but I don't think I had any great strengths in, chemistry, biology, maths.
So what was it for you? Which were the subjects for you?
Oh, English and languages and literature, particularly. Yeah.
Okay. So, but anything specific in terms of your reading that you remember at that schools?
No, at that age, no. I mean, we covered a fairly traditional curriculum, so there would have been a fair dose of Dickens and Shakespeare and Shakespeare's sonnets, Sonnet 116. Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not love which alters where it alteration finds. And so I could go on. It's,
please go on, please go on. Because,
no.
no, because I'm telling you, it's good for me.
If anyone feels, oh, that sounds fun, that sounds interesting, then Sonnet 116, and it's probably available on Google.
I tell you, it is much better when you hear it from you. There is the way you're saying it, it sounds good. Because anyway, you're talking to an illiterate person. He doesn't know all this. So it's just, everything sounds good to him. So I think if you should quote these. It just sounds good.
Okay.
No, but when you were reading Shakespeare, were you reading Shakespeare as he'd written it, or you were these more simplified versions? Because in our school, we used to have these simplified versions.
No, not simplified versions. It was the unadulterated. And so much depended on the quality of the teacher. You know, I was fortunate for some years to have an outstandingly good English teacher, and then unfortunately he left, and the next one was just no comparison. So so much depended on that.
So that means you're reading Shakespeare the way he read. Written it, and at what age is this happening?
Oh, I'm not sure, but it would have been, if not before, early in secondary school. I'm guessing now, but I would guess by age 11.
That's early. That's really early.
I would guess, but you know, frankly, I don't know. I don't.
Because I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you know if people in college here, when they're studying Shakespeare, are they still reading Shakespeare as he's written it? Pura? I don't know. I would not know that. But I know the simplified books. I've seen those because we used to have one in our school. But very basic, very basic.
Mm.
So we don't really pick up English the way we should pick it up. That is why.
That's a shame, because Shakespeare is it's a bit like an onion. You know, there are so many layers to it that it's if you can peel back at least some of the layers, then it's a very, very rich and rewarding experience.
Which is something I think you'll enjoy telling us about later sometime. I should just have a session with you just to tell us about Shakespeare. I think that should be enjoyable.
Well, I'm not sure whether what I still remember would satisfy the ardent Shakespeare cognoscenti.
For them, it's okay. For me, everything is good. Every person who hasn't read.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. So basically now, I mean, at school, anything else that you feel that those important moments that you want to tell us about? Anything that?
No. Thank goodness. As I say, there was that meeting with Dr. North. I think it was common at the time to, you could make the switch either at age 11, which I think was called the 11 plus stage. That was the exam, you know, take the 11 plus exam. Or you could make the switch at age 13, which was the common entrance stage. And, you know, had everything been wonderful in that first school, I would probably have stayed till 13. Thank goodness the decision was taken that I could move at age 11. So it's at that age that I went to the place in Derbyshire. And I think I started to mention that it was quite an inspirational establishment, in that it was founded by a gentleman called Cecil Reddy. And there were some features which were frankly a little bit nuts, like he believed that going to the toilet should be a social occasion. So he built these large common toilet areas, which had disappeared before I started in the school, you know, many years later. I think the school was started in the in the late 1800s. And as I say, he had very firm ideas: no corporal punishment, no classics, heavy emphasis on outward bound activities, camping, mountaineering, canoeing, and such like. And in fact, it was so inspirational that it started off a whole new wave of English public school. And one of the early teachers at the school, a gentleman called, what was his name? I forget, but one of the early teachers went off and founded Gordonston, which is the school where the Duke of Edinburgh studied. It was a very particular type of school. That was one example. Then there was an early German teacher, a gentleman called Kurt Hahn, who went off and founded I think it was Kurt Hahn actually who founded Gordonston. And then an early German teacher founded the Hermann Lietz schools in Germany. There was a string of, I forget how many, 4, 5, 6 German boarding schools founded along very similar lines. And the same in France, a group of schools called Les Roches. And these were all following, to a greater or lesser extent, the ideas that Cecil Ready had come up with. So I was at that school called Abbotsholme in Derbyshire, very different from many English public schools. And frankly, I think all the better for it. It was not very strong academically. My children who went to very strong academic schools, and that there's a league table, published by the Times, maybe the top 500 schools in the country. They used to laugh because their school was at sort of number 1 or in the top 3, whereas my school was more likely to be number 500. But it didn't really matter. And perhaps because there were, I don't want to suggest farming people are dense or anything, but maybe there were, lots of farming people who were less interested in academic studies than in other places. So academically, it wasn't strong. Only a tiny number of us ended up going to university. But as I say, I don't think badly of the school because of that. Those who wanted to, there was nothing to stop you applying yourself and proceeding further.
But how diverse are the children there that you're studying with?
Yeah, pretty diverse, from sort of 1 or 2 landed gentry to scholarship children who were simply there because their scholarship funds were made available.
But in terms of your interaction, you were actually interacting and you were friends with all kinds. I mean, there was not any specific kind for you.
No, with all sorts. And yeah, from age 11 through to leaving school at 17, that's where I was. Yeah.
But do you remember of those children that you grew up with, your friends? I mean, are they still in touch?
Some of them are.
That's really nice.
Yeah. Unfortunately, 1 or 2 have passed away of the friends. That's obviously sad. But yeah, I'm in touch with a few.
Yeah, well, that must be one good thing about boarding school, because you spend so much time together. I think that bonding must be strong.
Exactly.
But then what did they do? I mean, what was it like? I mean, at that point of time when you got out of school, what were people choosing as professions at that time? Oh, in terms of, okay, then next college, what were they looking at? What was?
Well, there was a mix, as I say. Only a small number of us went on to university. Quite a few maybe joined the family farm, and became farmers, or did something more vocational.
What kind of things? What are the vocations at that time that people were choosing?
What sort of things would they do? I don't know, to become a plumber, electrician, whatever, something more practical, vocational training, woodwork, metalwork, that sort of thing, work with your hands, which is, in my view, just as respectable as
Absolutely.
anything else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because countries like India definitely thought it's a little different here. But I think that way there should be that dignity of labor. I mean, that should not be something people should, in terms of profession, nothing should be looked down upon for sure.
Yes, I think just brief digression on that. I think the government at the time in this country made a big mistake when they decided to call many of the technical colleges, they renamed them as universities, which I think was a thoroughly bad idea because it created a lot of confusion. And the suggestion that everyone has to go to university, why? I mean, if you want to do something more practical with your hands, what's wrong with a technical college that will teach you the relevant skills? And at least when you call it a technical college, you know what you're dealing with. And it's not then a second-rate university, if you like.
Okay, but does that still exist? I mean, you don't have these technical institutions now?
Yes, it does. It does, I'm afraid. So, as I see it, it's confusing and a shame, but there it is.
Because we have some of these technical training institutions, we have that separately, so that people who don't want to go to college, they can do that also.
Yeah.
But in terms of university, that means everyone was not going to university. The way things are here, at least everyone largely would go to college. But you were saying that didn't happen.
Well, from many schools, no doubt from the academically stronger schools, I'm sure they had a much higher percentage who went on to university. As I said, my school was not academically very strong. And so there was only a minority of us who did. Yeah.
But one thing I of course did ask you, but in school now, you in class, you're actually interacting with your teachers, discussing things, debating things, all that was happening?
Yeah.
How many students did you have in a class for this teacher?
Small, very small classes. That's one of the I guess that's one of the cachet or one of the benefits of going into the private system, that there tended to be much smaller classrooms and therefore better teacher-student ratio.
Well, what would it be like? What, 15 to 1 or?
It varied from class to class. For example, I studied German, and there were very few who wanted to study German. So maybe only 2 or 3 of us. I forget. It was less than half a dozen, I'm sure.
Oh, that's not bad. So you get enough time.
Subjects that, more maybe compulsory. I forget, history, for example. I seem to remember somewhere between 12 and 20. I can't remember. It definitely wasn't more than 20.
Okay, so basically now you have we have to make a choice now. You finished your school, so then what do you choose, and why do you choose that?
Oh well, I chose to go away for a year.
Okay.
And before, yes. So what did I do? I'm just trying to remember. I think there was some German scheme. I spent a bit of time in Germany. I was going to spend half the year in Germany and half in France, and ended up having a very bad car accident. I wasn't driving, round about Christmas time of that year away. The year started in probably September time. So by December, I had this very bad car accident, came back to London, and then decided that was enough. Stay in Germany and moved on to France. And yeah. So I spent just out of things, traveling around, doing different things in Germany and France. Yeah, from studies to working to, yeah, those things.
But how serious was that accident? I mean, was it serious? Very serious?
I don't know. I was told it's a bit like a footballer who gets kicked on the head. You know, he's on the ground, gets kicked on the head. He gets up, plays the rest of the game, and then falls over and has no memory of anything between when he got up to finish the game and the end of the game. So I apparently managed to get out of the car and then literally dropped down on the pavement, was taken into hospital. Apparently but I have no recollection of this, told the ambulance driver, you can't leave now, I haven't got my glasses. But I have no memory of that. And next woke up in a hospital bed in wherever it was in middle Germany, I think Frankfurt.
But in terms of injuries, I mean, what were the injuries?
Nothing
like?
permanent, nothing permanent. If you looked closer than you can over the Zoom screen, you would see that there are one or two gentle scars just down there, but nothing serious.
And the other person who was driving?
What was really sad was that in the other car, the driver of my car shot a stop sign at an intersection, and coming the other way was a young couple who just got engaged, and one of the two perished. So very, very sad.
So that would have left a deep impact on you.
Yeah. No, it was very sad, and yeah. I mean, I didn't see anything. As I said, I was unconscious effectively from the moment of impact. So I didn't have any visual memories to haunt me. But of course, having heard what happened, truly very sad.
But it was, I mean, you got over it. It was because you didn't have that visual part of it. You were able to get over it earlier. That's how it was.
Well, I'm sure. Yeah.
But it's still, I'm sure it stays in your mind because you were part of something which was that serious. I'm sure that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. But then you come back. Then you come back to London, and then you join college, is it?
At the end of that year, yes, I'd applied to a university on the basis that it was the only university in the country at the time to offer a law and philosophy joint honours degree. There were other universities, for example, at Oxford, they have something called a PPE, Politics, Philosophy and Economics. But I wanted to study law, and I was very interested in the idea of combining that with study of philosophy. But I didn't study. Maybe that helped me to be more conscious of detail later on. I didn't study the detail of it. I applied for university, was accepted, and then went off for my year away. When I came back, I started to realize, and I looked at the timetables, that there were serious philosophy lectures which clashed with important law lectures. And when I looked closely at it was clear it was just impossible to do justice to both. So I felt a bit annoyed by that. Apparently, I was one of the only people who'd applied for that degree anyway, which made it easier for them to say, well, young man, you better choose and do one or the other. So I opted for law. Now, I'm just looking at the time, Vikram. We've been over an hour, and I must admire the resilience and patience and the fact that Kato and Lisa still appear to be wide awake. I fear in their situation,
Okay,
having been, had a stranger's early years recounted to me, I might have been nodding off by now, but I admire your patience and resilience and so on. Vikram, as I say, I've got a problem because I promised to do something.
sure. We can take it up in another episode. That's not a problem at all. But you'll be very surprised when you say these people are very interested. I'm telling you, if someone can sit for 4 hours, if Lisa would tell you, whatever she's heard up till now, let her tell you about it, how interesting she would have found it. Lisa, why don't you tell Mr. Lux about this? Because she's always sits through the Kato will tell us after that.
No, it's really very fascinating and fun. And you have a little bit of humor and little twists and turns along the way, which make it even more fun. So how can we fall asleep?
Very kind of you, Lisa.
So that's what I'm saying. These are people. Look at them. These are the people who stick around. They're the ones who've come here only because they enjoy being here. Everyone else watches it on YouTube when they can. They watch it in parts. But these are people who are part of the whole discussion because they're actually involved. Yes, Kato, what do you think?
Yes, it was very nice to hear this sort of your charming, calm voice, and sometimes you're telling us something we would never hear. For example, your experience in the boarding school is something quite refreshing, because in Japan, there's no boarding schools, no such institutions there.
Yeah.
And it's very British, right? And to hear that there has been 2 schools, right? And the earlier, sort of modern ones, which you said it started in the 18 something, right?
Yeah, late 1800s.
Late
Yes.
1800s, right? That tells us the richness of the history, right? And I'm sure I'm going back to England a year later when things permit.
Kate, I'm not an expert on the history of boarding schools, but I do know that there are Cambridge and Oxford colleges going back to the 1200s and 1300s. Whether there are any boarding schools, some of the oldest are places like Marlborough, Eton, I would guess, is pretty old, Harrow, Rugby. These are sort of typical classic English public schools. How old they are, I don't offhand know, but I'm sure it's measured in centuries rather than, decades. Yeah.
No, that's what I was telling you, Mr. Like, a lot of things that you would take for granted, but people would really find it interesting. Like Kato was saying, I mean, just the fact of experiences in a boarding school is something that is new. People in Japan, like you said, don't have that experience. So that is why it's important to go through that. I think those are things which, in general, things that people would want to know, and in particularly for your life and the way you have grown up and the experiences, the way they make a difference to you. So we'll continue this. We'll take it whenever it's convenient for you. I mean, we could do it in next month. I don't know if you want to look at your schedule, or we can discuss it later, whatever way.
Okay, let's discuss later, Vikram, when you decided how you'd like to play it.
But thank you very much for taking out time today.
It's a pleasure.
And look forward to the next one. And it's going to be slow. It's going to be slow, Mr. Lux. You have to understand. We have to go. I mean, I'm telling you, you've done this very fast. I told you we've got till college in episode number 1. It's big. Yes, Lisa, what do you want to say? Lisa, want to say something?
I just want to say next time we get a whole poem and not just a small stanza, and maybe a little bit more philosophy and maybe some of your secret insights you're not sharing that you've gained over the years.
Yeah, he's going to do that. He's going to do that. That part of it has to happen.
Okay,
Now,
good. So thank you. Good to see you. And till next time.
absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank
It
you.
was really nice. I'm telling you, these are things we need you. And we next time, maybe you'll up till then think of even more detail by that time.
Bye then.
All
Bye.
right. See you. Bye. Bye. Bye.